In a conversation with Mr. Esmail Mohades, author and translator, we discussed the recent ceasefire violation by the US against the Iranian regime. Although the regime is under intense external pressure, it's still going forward with this wave of executions. In the meantime, the Iranian resistance is preparing for a massive 100,000 Free Iran rally in Paris on June 20th, which we discussed. Let's listen in.
If a government decides to arm like 10 and 12-year-old kids, along with civilian women, and just put heavy machine guns in their hands at street checkpoints in its own capital city, who exactly are they preparing to fight?
Right, yeah.
Because, spoiler alert, it is definitely not the American military. Welcome to the deep dive, everyone.
Thanks for having me.
So it's May 2026, and, if you're following the geopolitical landscape in the Middle East right now, it is an absolute powder keg.
Oh, completely. It's incredibly volatile.
But the real story isn't just about missile trajectories or troop movements. That's just the surface level stuff.
Far from it, actually. I mean, to genuinely understand the volatility of this moment, we have to look entirely past those breaking news alerts.
Right.
We need to examine the underlying architecture of the conflict, the internal survival mechanisms of the state, and this fierce domestic struggle that's largely invisible to the outside world.
Which is exactly our mission today. We are unpacking the really intricate, layered reality of the current U.S.-Iran conflict.
There's a lot to get through.
It is. And our primary source for this, our lens today, is a highly detailed Persian language audio interview. And it features a conversation with political analyst Mr. Mohades.
Yeah, and we should probably mention right up front, this source pulls absolutely no punches.
None at all.
It dives into highly charged views on the U.S., on Israel, the Iranian regime, and various Iranian opposition factions, too.
Yeah, like the monarchists and groups like the PMOI. And just to be super clear with you, the listener, our goal today is not to endorse any of these specific political positions or factions.
Right, exactly. We're not taking sides here.
We are just putting these arguments under a microscope. We want you to see exactly how the players on the ground are strategizing and basically map out the logic of a conflict that feels, frankly, incredibly chaotic from the outside.
Because it does look chaotic, but there is a logic to it.
And I can promise you, by the end of this deep dive, you are going to have a massive aha moment regarding why decades of military airstrikes alone haven't managed to topple this regime.
It's super counterintuitive.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with the immediate catalyst for the current tension, which is the shattered U.S.-Iran ceasefire.
Right, the ceasefire that barely was.
Exactly. Because the ceasefire didn't break due to some sudden, brilliant strategic maneuver, according to the source, it was essentially built on quicksand.
Yeah, it was born out of just mutual exhaustion. I mean, you had a situation where neither the United States nor the Iranian regime had a clear, decisive path to victory. So they just paused.
It's like a standing 8 count in a boxing match.
That's a perfect way to put it.
Right. Neither fighter has actually resolved the conflict. They're just catching their breath before the next inevitable punch.
And when a ceasefire is constructed purely on fatigue, rather than a real foundational diplomatic agreement, it's inherently fragile. The moment one side catches its breath, the violence just resumes.
So now we are back to active hostilities. The regime has closed the Strait of Hormuz, the U.S. has functionally surrounded the area, and the skirmishes are really escalating.
They are. The analysis actually details a recent incident where the U.S. hit 2 regime fast boats that were attempting to lay mines.
And that killed 4 guards, right.
Right, and following that, the U.S. targeted a missile base in Bandar Abbas because it was reportedly firing at American planes.
Wow. But looking at the international response to this escalation, it's just completely fractured.
Oh, the divergence in goals is stark.
Yeah.
I mean, if we connect this to the bigger picture, you have Israel, which views the Iranian regime as a direct existential threat to its survival. They're advocating for the complete overthrow of the system.
Okay.
But on the other hand, the United States fundamentally lacks a cohesive long-term strategy.
Yeah, the source really goes in on this. American diplomats spent years pushing appeasement policies.
Right, exactly. They were attempting to negotiate with the regime as if it were a conventional, rational state actor. Like, it's capable of adhering to modern diplomatic norms.
But the argument here is that the regime inherently lacks the capacity to resolve issues through traditional diplomacy. Its entire structure is built on revolutionary conflict.
Right, so the U.S. is left stumbling. They're isolated alongside Israel, while European allies are desperately trying to just distance themselves from the fallout.
It's a very messy geopolitical chessboard.
It really is. And it's worth noting the dynamic between the U.S. and Israel here, because the source pushes back on something interesting.
What's that?
Well, there's a common narrative that Israel entirely directs American foreign policy in the region. Like they're essentially puppeteering the U.S. military.
Oh, right.
But the analysis pushes back hard on that idea. A superpower of that size just isn't easily manipulated into a massive conflict. However, individual actors can serve as highly effective catalysts in these volatile moments.
That catalyst concept is fascinating. The source brings up Reza Pahlavi, the son of the ousted Shah.
Yeah, he is essentially trying to play the Ahmed Chalabi playbook from the 2003 Iraq War, acting as a catalyst to spur U.S. intervention.
But the problem with that strategy, according to the analysis, is the stark lack of a ground game.
Precisely. Pahlavi is attempting to manufacture a catalyst moment without the internal network or operational power inside Iran to actually support it.
Yeah, there's even that wild reported incident from a U.S. newspaper. They claim that Donald Trump, behind closed doors, referred to him as the loser prince.
Yeah, that really highlights the issue. You just can't catalyze a revolution from the outside if you don't hold any real influence on the inside.
So the external pressure on the regime is staggering. You have a massive U.S. military presence closing in, a fractured global landscape, and targeted strikes taking out fast boats and missile bases.
It's intense.
Which begs the question, if the military pressure is this intense, why hasn't this regime collapsed under the weight of it all?
Because we keep analyzing them as a monolithic state.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, if you think of the regime as a single centralized pillar, you assume striking the top brings the whole thing down. But it doesn't work like that.
Yeah.
It relies on a highly sophisticated dual structure. It's a two-engine system of survival.
Wait, so if the leadership is decapitated, the whole thing doesn't just crumble?
Not necessarily.
Okay, let's unpack that. What exactly constitutes these two engines?
So the first engine is the ideological glue. This is the concept of velayat faqih, or absolute clerical rule.
Right.
It provides the spiritual, religious, and symbolic justification for the state's existence. It's the supreme leader and the clerics. That is the face of the regime, the narrative that holds the system together for its true believers.
But a narrative doesn't run an economy. It doesn't suppress protests.
No, it certainly doesn't. And that is where the second engine comes in. That's the massive, entrenched military and economic muscle of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC. And the history of how they accumulated this power is critical. After the Iran-Iraq War ended, the IRGC didn't just return to the barracks. They demanded their share of the power pie as a reward for fighting the war.
And under Presidents Rafsanjani and Ahmadinejad, they basically swallowed the economy whole, right?
They systematically took over. The IRGC became deeply embedded in the country's wealth. We're talking about controlling massive construction conglomerates, telecommunications, even illicit smuggling networks.
Jeez.
Yeah, they aren't just a military branch. They are the largest economic monopoly in the country.
So going back to the strikes, if the Tier 1 and Tier 2 commanders of the IRGC are actively being taken out by targeted strikes, why doesn't that destabilize the structure? How does an organization survive losing its leadership if the whole thing is built on their power?
Because you're thinking of it like a traditional military chain of command.
Okay, so how should I think about it?
Think of it more like a deeply corrupt, multi-billion-dollar corporation. The supreme leader is just the public CEO. The IRGC operates like a ruthless board of directors who actually control all the bank accounts, the supply chains, and the underlying assets.
Oh, wow. So if the CEO dies or if a few board members are arrested, they don't liquidate the company.
Exactly. There is way too much money and power on the line. They will simply install a new figurehead.
That makes terrifying sense. And the analysis even suggests who that figurehead might be, right? They bring up Mojtaba Khamenei, the current supreme leader's son.
Yeah, and they wouldn't put him there for his brilliant leadership skills. They just need him to maintain that ideological facade, that velayat faqih glue, so the IRGC can keep its grip on the wealth completely uninterrupted.
Okay, so that structural resilience is exactly why the regime actively seeks a war of attrition rather than a direct conventional confrontation with the United States?
Yes, they understand they cannot win a traditional symmetrical war, but they excel at managing chaos. Creating crises is their primary survival skill.
Which explains so much. I mean, the source notes, they are willing to fire 3,000 missiles and drones at the United Arab Emirates. Think about the absurdity of that for a second.
It is absurd. The UAE previously helped them bypass international sanctions.
Right. So they are indiscriminately attacking the very economic lifelines that kept them afloat just to project this chaotic, unpredictable power.
Because they escalate the violence betting that Western powers will blink first. They think the West will back down to avoid a wider regional war. They are structurally designed to absorb international pressure.
But here's where it gets really interesting. Because while they are designed to handle external shocks, how do they handle internal pressure? We pivot from international posturing to their relationship with the Iranian people.
Which the source identifies as the regime's true greatest fear. Not American aircraft carriers in the Strait of Hormuz. It is the Iranian populace.
This is a state that has functionally been at war with its own people since June 20, 1981. And the internal pressure they are trying to manage is astronomical, starting with the economy.
Oh, we're talking about an economy of sheer survival. Inflation in Iran has hovered over 50% for 10 to 15 years consecutively.
50% for over a decade.
Yeah. Imagine living in a reality where the price of basic everyday goods skyrockets by 300 to 400% in a short span.
And the regime attempts to manage this domestic boiling point through extreme isolation, right?
Right. The internet is heavily restricted. Citizens have to navigate a labyrinth of complex VPNs just to make a secure phone call to family members living abroad.
It is a dual strategy of economic starvation and digital suffocation.
Which brings us back to the image you opened with. Those theatrical shows of force on the streets of Tehran, setting up checkpoints and arming 10 to 12-year-old children and women with heavy weapons.
It's like a magician's misdirection. Because those weapons aren't meant to shoot down U.S. F-35 fighter jets.
No, of course not.
It is pure psychological theater. It's a domestic terror tactic designed entirely to scare the local neighborhood into staying indoors. It's a physical reminder that the state is armed, irrational, and willing to use lethal force on its own streets.
But what's fascinating here is that the effectiveness of that psychological theater is breaking down. And the mechanics of why it's failing are vital to understand.
Yeah, because historically, they've used ultimate force to successfully crush dissent.
Exactly. The source points back to 1988, when the mass execution of 30,000 political prisoners successfully froze society. It terrified the public into a generation of silence.
And they are trying to run that exact same playbook today. The executions have escalated dramatically. The source reports over 40 members and sympathizers of the PMOI executed just in recent months.
Right. Now, the PMOI, the People's Mujahideen Organization of Iran, has historically been the primary organized resistance group.
Which is why they frequently bear the brunt of these crackdowns.
Exactly, and that's following a staggering 2,100 executions across the country in just the previous year.
Over 2,000 state executions in a single year? That's just horrific.
It is. But the psychological mechanism of fear has fundamentally shifted since 1988. In 88, the society was isolated, disconnected. The trauma forced them inward.
But today's youth are hyper-connected despite those VPN restrictions. They see what is happening. The executions are backfiring.
Right, because if the state is willing to execute you for dissenting, it signals to the youth that this dissent is the one thing that actually threatens the regime's power. It acts as a beacon.
So the violence is no longer a paralyzing agent. It is driving the younger generation directly toward the organized resistance and the rebellion units operating inside the country.
When state violence loses its ability to freeze a population, it becomes a mobilizing force.
And this internal mobilization is crucial because the international response has been incredibly hollow. The rest of the world is watching this domestic boiling point and essentially doing nothing.
Yeah, the source heavily criticizes the Western response to these human rights abuses for being all rhetoric and no action.
Right.
For instance, the European Parliament passed a resolution on May 21st condemning the executions. And the vote was overwhelming, 516 votes in favor, only 14 against.
But, I mean, a resolution doesn't stop an execution.
Because the European Union lacks a truly unified, actionable foreign policy. It is deeply fragmented. You have countries like France simultaneously issuing public condemnations while allegedly attempting to secure under-the-table diplomatic or economic deals with the regime.
Wow.
And the EU didn't even officially list the IRGC as a terrorist organization until this past February. The diplomatic lag is severe.
So the West offers paper condemnations. And foreign military invasion isn't a viable solution either.
Not at all.
The source points out the logistical reality is just daunting. Estimates suggest it would take anywhere from 500,000 to 700,000 ground troops to actually invade, occupy, and stabilize a country the size and complexity of Iran.
And the American public is deeply unequivocally opposed to launching another massive ground war in the Middle East.
So with appeasement policies having thoroughly failed and a foreign military invasion off the table, the analysis argues there's only one viable path forward.
Regime change from within. The burden falls entirely on the Iranian people and the organized resistance, specifically the National Council of Resistance and the PMOI.
Which brings us to how the diaspora is stepping into this international vacuum.
Yes.
So what does this all mean? Why should you, the listener, care about a rally in Paris? Because when you see footage of a rally on your newsfeed, it's easy to dismiss it as just another protest, right? Just people holding signs thousands of miles away.
Yeah, it's easy to overlook.
But you have to look at what a gathering of that magnitude represents geopolitically. The source highlights a massive rally planned in Paris for June 20, 2026, aiming to gather over 100,000 Iranians.
And the significance really is in the coalition. This isn't a monolithic group. The effort brings together people from diverse factions, including ethnic minorities like the Kurds and the Balochs, who have faced their own severe marginalization.
They are coalescing to act as the undeniable voice for those who have been digitally and physically silenced inside Iran.
Exactly. The rally isn't about promoting a single rigid political ideology or competing in petty squabbles with other opposition factions. It is about securing global, public recognition for the Iranian people's legitimate right to resist a violent state.
When international governments refuse to act, the diaspora has to prove that a viable, organized, and deeply committed alternative to the regime actually exists.
It's essentially a government in waiting, asserting its legitimacy on the world stage. And the source points out a really poignant detail about the organizers, particularly the women driving this movement.
It's incredible, honestly.
You are talking about women who have been fighting this exact cause since they were teenagers. They have been organizing for over 40 years.
Decades of exile.
Political assassinations, diplomatic betrayals, and sheer exhaustion. Yet they possess a level of operational resilience that outlasts any single U.S. presidency or any temporary geopolitical ceasefire.
It is a multi-generational commitment to dismantling a system that relies entirely on fear. So let's pull all of these threads together.
Yeah, let's recap.
We started by looking at a fragile, exhaustion-based ceasefire shattering into a complex geopolitical chess match in the Strait of Hormuz. You've got the U.S. lacking a cohesive strategy and Israel viewing the regime as an existential threat.
Then we unpacked the dual-engine survival tactics of the state. We saw how the IRGC functions like a ruthless corporate board of directors, hiding behind the ideological facade of the clerics, utilizing chaos to protect their massive economic monopolies.
Then we examined the harrowing domestic reality. An economy crippled by decades of 50% inflation, and a regime resorting to the theatrical absurdity of arming children on the streets.
But most importantly, we saw how the horrific escalation of state executions is fundamentally backfiring, mobilizing a hyper-connected youth instead of freezing them in terror like it did back in 1988.
And finally, we explored how the Iranian diaspora is stepping up to fill the void left by a fragmented international community, organizing a 100,000-person coalition in Paris to demand global recognition for their right to resist.
Which is huge.
Understanding these interconnected dynamics gives you a critical lens for decoding the daily headlines. It reveals that the real story out of the Middle East is rarely just about which fast boat was struck or which diplomat issued a statement. It is about the endurance, the psychology, and the mechanics of the people on the ground living through it.
And this raises an important question, something for you to just mull over. If history and current events show that immense state violence eventually reaches a tipping point where it stops paralyzing a population and starts mobilizing it instead, what happens to a heavily armed ideological regime when the very people it relies on to govern simply stop being afraid of the consequences?
When the mechanism of fear breaks, the whole machine just grinds to a halt. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the headlines, keep looking for the deeper mechanics behind the news, and we will catch you next time.